Why do your worst thoughts stay quiet all day and then appear the moment you lie down? Not gradually, not with any warning. They arrive all at once, with an intensity that somehow feels greater than anything you faced during the previous 12 hours. The conversation that still hasn't happened. The problem that has no obvious solution. The memory you didn't choose, but your nervous system chose for you. The worry that stayed quietly in the background all day, only to step into the spotlight now, in the darkness, in the silence, with such overwhelming force that it's hard to believe it's the very same thought that had been there all along without carrying the same weight. And the question most people never ask precisely enough is this: why now? Why does the nervous system seem to wait until this exact moment, the least convenient time for processing, the moment with the greatest cost to your rest, to bring forward everything that was left unfinished? The answer begins by completely reversing the way most people frame the problem. Difficult thoughts do not appear at the worst possible time. They appear at the first available time. That distinction, small in words but enormous in its implications, completely changes what is happening when your bed becomes the place where the hardest thoughts of the day finally emerge. During the previous 12 hours, your nervous system had been continuously managing external demands, messages to answer, tasks to complete, conversations to follow, decisions to make, stimuli to process, filter, and respond to. Every one of those external demands required your attention to remain anchored in the outside world. Not because of discipline, not because of willpower, because it was functionally necessary. The environment kept presenting new targets for your attention, and attention, by design, moves toward whatever is immediately relevant and requires a response. The difficult internal material was present all day, but it was competing at a disadvantage against a constant stream of external demands that held immediate priority for your attention. When those demands stop, when the screen is turned off, the lights go out, your body lies down, and the outside world stops offering new places for your attention to land. The attentional field, finally free of competition, turns toward what has been waiting. The material that, no matter how many meetings, tasks, or conversations filled your day, was never truly processed. Alexander Borbély, a researcher at the University of Zurich, developed one of the most influential models in sleep science, the framework now known as the two-process model of sleep regulation. The model describes two interacting systems that regulate sleep and wakefulness. Process S is the homeostatic sleep drive, the gradual accumulation of substances produced by brain activity during wakefulness, creating an increasing biological need for sleep. The longer you stay awake, the stronger this pressure becomes. Process C is the circadian alerting signal, the biological activation generated by your internal clock to keep your body awake, alert, and functional throughout the day, counteracting the growing pressure to sleep. And here is the piece that explains something essential about what happens when you finally lie down. Throughout the day, Process C, the alerting signal, is operating at full strength. It keeps your cognitive system active, your attention focused, and your capacity for processing fully available. And importantly, it also helps your nervous system keep difficult internal material in the background, to continue directing attention outward and to carry out the emotional regulation that allows you to function despite what remains unresolved. At night, Process C begins to decline, not suddenly, gradually, over the final hours of the day. And as it declines, your ability to keep difficult material pushed into the background declines with it. Your thoughts do not become more intense at night. The system's capacity to hold them back, which had been artificially elevated by Process C throughout the day, simply returns to its natural level. Think about what that means. During the day, there was an active biological signal helping to keep your attention focused outward while holding back internal processing. At night, that signal withdraws, and the material that had been contained by the combination of external demands and the circadian alerting signal finally finds the space that had been unavailable to it. It is not the worst possible moment. It is the first moment that is genuinely available. But that still doesn't fully explain why the thoughts that emerge at this moment are usually the heaviest ones. Why don't neutral thoughts appear instead? Or unresolved issues that are merely practical? Why does the nervous system seem to select from everything available the material carrying the greatest emotional weight? The answer reveals something fundamental about how the nervous system prioritizes what needs processing, and why for some people the bed becomes much more than simply a place to sleep. There is one specific mechanism that separates people who occasionally have difficult nights after particularly demanding days from those for whom difficulty sleeping becomes a consistent pattern regardless of how stressful the day actually was. That mechanism is not found in the thoughts themselves. It is found in a learning process that happens without the person ever noticing it. Thomas Borkovec, a psychologist at Pennsylvania State University, spent decades studying what keeps insomnia going after it begins. What he identified as the central mechanism was not how much people worried, but the process through which worry became associated with the sleeping environment itself. Borkovec found that people who repeatedly spend their nights in states of worry, rumination, or heightened cognitive activation are quietly creating an association between that mental state and the context in which it occurs. The bed, the lying down position, the darkness, the unique silence of the early morning hours. Through repetition, these contextual elements become signals, in the same way that any cue can, through conditioning, become the trigger for a response that was originally produced only by something else. Richard Bootzin, a psychologist at the University of Arizona, developed the behavioral treatment that became the gold standard for chronic insomnia, based precisely on this principle. He called it stimulus control therapy. Its logic is both simple and remarkably precise. If the bed has become a conditioned stimulus for activation and worry, through repeated nights in which that is exactly what happened there, then the solution begins by weakening that association. But the mechanism Bootzin was treating reveals something important. For many people, difficulty sleeping does not begin because their thoughts become dramatically worse. It begins with nights in which the nervous system associates the act of going to bed with a state of activation. Then, on the nights that follow, simply lying down begins to trigger that same state, regardless of what actually happened during the day. Imagine a very specific situation: a week of intense pressure at work. During those nights, the nervous system goes to bed already activated, with the week's unfinished loops, worries about tomorrow, and mental processing that never had room to be completed during the day. Those nights are difficult. The week ends. The pressure eases. Objectively, tomorrow is calm. And yet, the moment the person lies down, the nervous system returns to the same activated state as on the previous nights. Not because the day's content is comparable, but because the context itself has now become conditioned to trigger the same state that developed during that stressful week. Allison Harvey, whose work spans both the University of Oxford and the University of California, Berkeley, carefully mapped the cognitive behaviors that, while attempting to solve nighttime thinking, often end up keeping it alive. Harvey developed what she called the cognitive model of insomnia. One of its central elements is selective monitoring for sleep-related threats. Instead of simply trying to fall asleep, the person who is worried about not sleeping begins actively monitoring every sign that sleep is not happening. Checking the clock, calculating how many hours remain before morning, evaluating whether the body is producing the right sensations of someone who is about to fall asleep, monitoring the mind itself to see whether thoughts are slowing down. This monitoring, which seems perfectly reasonable from the perspective of someone trying to solve the problem, has an effect that Harvey consistently documented. It keeps the nervous system awake, because monitoring is an activity that requires sustained attention, and sustained attention is the exact opposite of the state required for sleep to emerge. The safety behaviors Harvey described follow an internally consistent logic. I leave the TV on so I won't be alone with my thoughts. I get out of bed to do something when I can't sleep. I stay on my phone to tire out my eyes. Each of these behaviors reduces anxiety in the short term, and each of them, over time, strengthens the association between the bed and activation, because the bed has become the place where these behaviors occur, the place where difficulty is repeatedly confirmed, the place where the nervous system learns, night after night, that this is the expected state. Think about how this creates a cycle that sustains itself almost independently of whatever happened during the day. The day was good, the nervous system was relatively calm, but once you lie down, the context activates the conditioned state. That activation gives rise to difficult thoughts. The thoughts create even more activation. Trying to monitor the state in order to fix it creates even more activation still. And after an hour, you are more awake than you were when you first went to bed. Not because of anything that happened during the day, but because of what the bed itself has learned to produce. If this describes something you have experienced, that feeling that your bed has somehow become the hardest place for your mind to be, this channel exists to give a name to exactly that pattern. Subscribe so the next video is already waiting for you. But there is still something that the two-process model and contextual conditioning do not fully explain. Why is it that the thoughts that emerge are specifically the ones carrying the greatest emotional weight? The ones that seem impossible to resolve? The ones that return over and over to the same memory or the same worry? Why not simply any unresolved thought from the day? The answer lies in a process that the brain is already beginning at that very moment, and it explains why the thoughts that emerge at bedtime follow a pattern that is not chaotic at all. They follow a very specific logic. The brain is not passive during sleep. In many ways, it is actually more active during certain stages of sleep than it is during many periods of wakefulness. And the process of memory consolidation and emotional processing that unfolds during sleep does not begin once your eyes close. It begins beforehand. Researchers Björn Rasch at the University of Freiburg and Jan Born at the University of Tübingen spent years mapping how the brain selects and reactivates memories during sleep, and what begins to happen during the transition into sleep itself. What their research revealed is that the brain does not process every memory from the day equally during sleep. It prioritizes, and the criteria for that prioritization are not random. Memories carrying greater emotional significance receive higher priority for consolidation. Experiences that have not yet been fully processed, that still contain open loops, that have not reached resolution, that have not been integrated into a meaningful context, remain in a state of greater accessibility. What this means is that, during the transition into sleep, the brain is gradually beginning the process of deciding what it will process and consolidate over the coming hours. And the highest priority candidates are precisely the emotionally charged material that remains unresolved. The brain is not being cruel to you at bedtime. It is carrying out its cognitive maintenance work during the only period in which it can do so most deeply, and during the transition into sleep, it is signaling what is waiting in line. This process, combined with what the default mode network does when external input decreases, which this channel has explored in previous videos, creates a very specific combination. The network that naturally shifts processing toward internally relevant material, especially social and emotional content, during silence and in the absence of external tasks, begins to dominate. And it encounters exactly the material the brain has already marked as the night's priority. Whatever carries the greatest emotional weight and remains unresolved. The result does not feel like maintenance work. It feels like an attack. Because the brain's logic is functional, it is trying to process what needs to be processed, but the moment when that processing begins is precisely the moment when you have the fewest emotional resources available to handle its intensity. There is a connection here that is rarely explained directly. During the day, the emotional system operates under the influence of several factors that naturally regulate its intensity. Everyday sympathetic activation maintains levels of cortisol that, among many functions, help contain certain emotional responses. The constant demands of external processing recruit prefrontal regions that exert top-down regulation over the limbic system. The presence of other people, task-oriented attention, and the steady stream of small accomplishments throughout the day all have a moderating effect on how emotional material is experienced. At night, those moderators gradually withdraw. Cortisol falls to its lowest levels. External demands have ended. The prefrontal top-down regulation becomes less effective as Borbély's process C declines. And it is precisely in this state, with fewer regulatory resources available, that the brain brings forward, with even greater intensity, the very material that requires the most regulation. For many people, this creates an experience that feels circular and impossible to escape. The more emotionally difficult the material is, the more regulatory resources would be needed to process it effectively. Yet the later it gets, the more depleted those resources become. And the more the brain tries to regulate, monitor, and solve the problem, as Allison Harvey documented, the more activated it becomes. Think about situations where this cycle becomes unmistakably clear. Someone who, throughout an exceptionally difficult week, manages to stay focused on work, daily responsibilities, and conversations, but then, at 3 o'clock in the morning, finds themselves reliving the same scene over and over again. The argument, the mistake, the worry, with a level of detail and emotional intensity that never appeared during the day itself. Not because the problem becomes bigger at 3 in the morning, but because 3 in the morning is when that material finally has the brain's full attention, with no competition, no emotional buffering, and none of the resources that helped keep it in perspective throughout the day, or someone who spends weeks living with uncertainty about an important decision, functioning reasonably well during the daytime. Yet the moment they lie down to sleep, that decision completely dominates their attentional field in a way the entire day never allowed. It is not that the decision has suddenly become more urgent. It is that the brain has begun the integration process that requires this material to be accessed, and bedtime is the only period available for that deeper internal work. The most specific pattern many people describe is this. Even after solving the problem cognitively, reaching a conclusion, making a plan, deciding what action to take, the nighttime thinking does not necessarily stop. Because the brain is not processing only the logical solution, it is processing the emotional dimension attached to that experience. And the emotional dimension is not satisfied by a rational answer. It requires a different kind of processing, the kind that takes place primarily during REM sleep. And nighttime thinking is in part the waiting room for that process. If there is one thing that changes once you understand what is happening at bedtime, it is the way you frame the problem. Nighttime thinking is not a failure of the nervous system. It is not your brain working against you. It is your brain trying, in the only window it had, to do something the day never allowed it to do. The problem is not that your brain chose the worst possible time. The problem is that the worst possible time was the only time available. And that changes the question. Not, how do I make my brain stop thinking at night? A question that, as Harvey and Borkovec documented, often makes the problem worse by recruiting the very mental activity that is trying to suppress it. But rather, what can I create during the day so that the waiting line at night becomes smaller? Not as a permanent solution, as an understanding of what the brain is asking for. The material that appears at night is asking to be processed, not necessarily resolved immediately, but acknowledged, given space, allowed to be registered in some way instead of simply being postponed yet again. When the day includes, even briefly, moments in which your inner experience can be noticed instead of being constantly pushed aside by the endless stream of external demands, the nighttime queue becomes shorter. Not because the problems have been solved, but because the nervous system has registered that the material was acknowledged during the day, and material that has already been acknowledged no longer needs, with the same urgency, to force its way into awareness at night. This does not mean difficult nights will disappear once your days include those moments. It means those nights are, in part, a signal. A signal that the day was too full for the nervous system to process what it needed to process, and that creating space for it sometime during the day, even briefly, even without finding solutions, is a way of respecting what your nervous system is trying to accomplish at night. Subscribe to follow what comes next. Every video here adds another piece to the map of how the nervous system actually works. Alexander Borbély's two-process model, developed at the University of Zurich, describes the interaction between process S, the homeostatic sleep pressure that gradually builds during wakefulness, and process C, the circadian alerting signal that keeps the cognitive system active during the day and helps contain difficult internal material. At night, as process C gradually declines, the brain progressively loses its ability to keep difficult internal content in the background, not because the thoughts themselves become stronger, but because the resources that had been containing them throughout the day gradually withdraw. Thomas Borkovec's research at Pennsylvania State University on pre-sleep cognitive activation showed that worry and rumination at bedtime are the central mechanisms underlying difficulty falling asleep. Repeated nights of cognitive activation in bed gradually create a conditioned association between the bed and that mental state, causing the simple act of lying down to trigger activation regardless of what happened during the day. Stimulus control therapy, developed by Richard Bootzin at the University of Arizona as a treatment for insomnia, is based precisely on reversing that conditioning. The bed, having become a conditioned cue for activation, can be deconditioned, but only by understanding that the conditioning occurred and that reinforcing it through nighttime behaviors requiring intense cognitive effort keeps the association alive. The cognitive model of insomnia, developed by Allison Harvey at the University of Oxford and later at UC Berkeley, describes the cognitive behaviors that maintain sleep difficulties, selective monitoring for sleep-related threats, constant observation of one's own level of activation, and safety behaviors that temporarily reduce anxiety while reinforcing the association between the bed and wakefulness. The effort to control the state in order to solve the problem paradoxically becomes part of the mechanism that maintains it. Research by Björn Rasch and Jan Born at the Universities of Freiburg and Tübingen respectively on memory reactivation and sleep consolidation showed that, during the transition into sleep, the brain prioritizes emotionally significant material that remains unresolved, initiating the selection of what will be processed and consolidated throughout the night. The thoughts that emerge at bedtime are, in part, the waiting line for that processing, the brain signaling what it considers most important for overnight cognitive maintenance. If any part of this video describes something you experience, that feeling that your bed has become the hardest place for your mind to be, leave a comment below. Just one word, whatever stayed with you. Because understanding what is actually happening, that this is not weakness, not oversensitivity, but a nervous system doing its job in the only window available, already changes the way you move through difficult nights. But there is something about everything we explored here that points beyond bedtime itself. If your body spends the entire day accumulating experiences that never found space to be processed, if your nervous system has been working in the background on something your conscious mind never fully noticed, then another question naturally follows. What else is your body processing without your mind even knowing? Because what neuroscience continues to reveal is that the conscious mind is rarely the first to receive the most important information about the world around you. Your body gets there first. The autonomic nervous system detects, processes, and begins responding long before any conscious thought about the situation has even formed. You have probably experienced this yourself, that feeling that something wasn't right, without being able to explain why. A sense of unease in a situation that contained no obvious threat. An immediate sense of calm with someone you had only just met, before knowing anything concrete about them. Your body noticed something your conscious mind had not yet processed. And it did so through signals so subtle that the conscious mind never registers them as information, while the nervous system has already received them, evaluated them, and begun responding. How this happens, what signals the body detects that the conscious mind never notices, and what this ability reveals about the way the nervous system understands the world long before conscious thought catches up, is what the next video explores.